I'm going to bring this presentation to you about how questions, if you just change the way you ask questions, you really can make big changes in the world around you. So I'm going to put up some slides in just a second. But what I want to ask is that this is an interactive session. So as we have opportunities for people to talk, if you can jump in and give some answers, and let's have some collaboration so that this is not a boring listening to me presentation. I do ask that you mute unless you're talking. That way we don't get a lot of feedback and background noise. And with that said, I'm excited to be here and happy to meet some new friends. So we will get started with Change Your Questions, Change Your World. So I knew it was already described me, so I'm not going to continue doing that. I'll instead describe coaching. So when we look at professional coaching and how it pertains to our Agile world, it can actually help us to help our teams to move further and get better results. The thing that we want to remember as coaches is what coaching actually is. So if we are going to work with people in a coaching manner, we have to have this mindset that they are actually very creative, that they are resourceful and competent, and they're whole and complete. We're not there to fix them. So I do find that in the Agile industry, there are often misconceptions of what coaching is. So I hear people basically saying, well, I'm a coach, so I am going to go and fix people. I'm going to go jump into this organization and tell them how they should change and what they're doing wrong and how they should do better. But if you think about it, when was the last time someone came to you and told you how broken and messed up you were and how much smarter they were than you, and they were going to fix you? And what was your reaction to that? Was it like, oh, yes, I can't wait to be fixed. I'm so glad you told me how broken I was. Or was it, who do you think you are? Don't come tell me what to do. You don't even know me. So we have to recognize that if we are actually going to be a coach, then we have to gain the trust and respect of the people we work with. And they can't respect us if we don't respect them. So in order to respect them, we have to see them as whole and complete and competent. And even if they have ideas that are different than our ideas, that's got to be okay with us, because their ideas may be different, but it doesn't invalidate them. It just means that there's not one right answer for anything. Anything in Agile has more than one answer. So what's important is that we understand the problem and we focus on how we're going to find the solution, not on how my solution is best. So another thing that I want to make sure that you remember as you're digging into this coaching world is that every conversation you have with people from here on out, just because you learn some coaching, doesn't mean that they are all coaching conversations. Coaching skills are great and they can help any of your communications. But it's important to understand that just because we're learning coaching and now we've got this new revelation of how great coaching is, it doesn't mean that every person you talk to, you are going to coach. You have to have permission to coach. You work with someone, and when you're coaching them, they should be aware that they are being coached. None of this stealth coaching stuff where people say, oh, you're doing that thing again. When we do that, it doesn't build trust. And people don't trust you, and they don't trust coaching. So what's more important is that we have a clear understanding and an agreement that if I'm going to be doing coaching with you, then you are a willing and aware client. That doesn't mean that you can't use coaching skills in any of your conversations. It just means that maybe they're not a coaching conversation, they're just a good conversation with good communication skills. So today, the coaching skill we're going to focus on the most is questions. And how do we ask well-formed questions? But first, I want to tell you a story. For those of you who are in the United States, you probably know what the Macys Thanksgiving Day Parade is. If you're outside of the United States, I want to give you a little bit of context. So on Thanksgiving Day in the United States, every year, Macy's, which is a department store, or a really, really large department store that's been around for many, many decades, throws a parade where these huge balloons that represent different things, cartoon characters, companies, they are brought down the streets of New York, and there's this huge parade where thousands and thousands of people come out to see it and bring their children, and it's televised, so it's kind of like a yearly event that families grow up with. Well, this is the story about how this parade got started. So Macy's, this department store, contracted with a puppeteer one year, and it was several decades ago. And they asked this puppeteer if he would make a window display for them to put in in the front window of their store, and they wanted it to be moving. They wanted it to be really interactive, so people would see it and they would get very excited about it, and then they would go in the store and go shopping. So this puppeteer made this window display where people were using the puppets and they were moving around, and Macy's was right, it worked. People would stop on the street and they would watch the window display and they would get all interested and they loved it, so they went inside and they went shopping. Then Macy's had this great idea, and said, well, if this window with these puppets is such a great marketing technique and we're getting so many sales, we should do something even bigger. So they decided that they would throw a Christmas parade and to kick off the Christmas season. And they would invite the city to come to this Christmas parade, and then the idea was that everyone would see the puppets going down the street, and it would draw them to the store to come in and buy toys and gifts for their children. So what happened here is the picture that you see. Macy's expected that this would be a big hit, that maybe 500 people would show up for the parade and they would get a bunch of new sales. But the parade was more popular than they thought, and 3 million people showed up for this parade. You can see the crowd here, and between, there's a street here in the middle between these two buildings, going across, and that's where the puppets were walking through. You can barely see the parade coming through there, but there's a few looks like cars or trucks and a float on the right hand side. So these people were 200 people deep. So while the parade was this huge success because 3 million people showed up, there were actually 3 million very angry people, because they brought their children and they came out to see these puppets, but they couldn't see them because there were so many people. So Macy's decided to regroup, and they said, well, this was obviously a great success, but also a great failure. So we need to figure out how to make these puppets bigger so that we can do this parade again next year and people will be able to see the puppets. So the puppeteer spent about almost a year trying to figure out how to make the puppets bigger, but he couldn't do it. He kept asking himself, how can I make these puppets bigger? So he made them bigger, and they were too heavy and they'd topple over, or they were not able to be controlled by people because they just couldn't get them um, big enough for people to see, yet small enough to be able to handle and to not be toppling over and things like that. So one day, this man, this puppeteer, decided, well, I'm just going to take a break. I'm going to go out and I'm going to walk through Central Park, which is a huge park in New York. And while he was there, just sitting on a park bench, he saw a child with a balloon. And the child let go of the balloon, and the balloon floated up. And what he began to notice was that all the people in the park started pointing at the balloon and telling their children, look, there's a balloon, look at it. So everyone was looking up, and even though this balloon was, Anu, can you mute everybody? Even though this balloon was small, it was very visible. So what happened was he realized that he had been asking himself the wrong question. Instead of asking, how can we make the balloon taller, he should have been asking himself, how do we make the balloon more visible? So by asking himself a different question, he was able to come up with a solution. And they made great big balloons and put them on sticks. So the balloons were like puppets.
Coach Terry, can you?
Mute in your room. There you go.
Okay.
Okay. So the people on the ground would navigate these the puppets, and then that year the parade was a success. You can see how small the people are in this picture compared to the actual balloon. So they used these puppets. Now, of course, the balloons are more sophisticated. They're filled with helium and they're floating above the clouds. I mean, above the crowds, so that they can be seen. So the moral of this story is that by just changing the questions, you can actually come up with new solutions. And that's the whole premise of coaching. So the role of a coach is to ask the client questions that cause them to think in different perspectives. So if this man had a coach, he probably would have came to this conclusion about making the balloons more visible a lot sooner, because the coach would have asked him different questions that would have helped him to get there. So some of the reasons why we want to ask people questions, and it's more powerful to do that than it is to give answers and solutions, is that when we ask questions, it causes people to think outside the box. So our minds are locked in this little bitty box that we live in, and this is the only way we can think until someone asks us questions that make us go beyond our current thinking and look at things from new perspectives. Questions also help people to design their own solutions, which I'm sure you know that when you determine how you're going to solve your problem and you decide what you're going to do, you're a lot more invested in it. You're a lot more excited about it, and you feel empowered because you're really smart and you can make your own decisions. You don't need to be micromanaged and told what to do. And because people create their own solutions, questions actually motivate them to take action. So these are the reasons why we want to use coaching skills with our Agile teams and ask them questions more than we want to provide solutions. We're all very good solution makers, but we have to trust that we're not the only solution maker. Our teams also have the ability to come up with really good solutions, more than likely better solutions than we can come up with. So when we look at questions and what makes them powerful, I'd like to get a little feedback from people, and you can either chat or you can speak up. What, when you read these questions that are on the screen, which ones do you think are more powerful or more effective for the person who's hearing the question? Is it, what time is it? Did you take a shower? What possibilities exist that we haven't thought of? And what does it mean to be independent? Which of those seem more powerful? Yeah, so I'm seeing answers come up that it's number 3 and number 4. Right, so those are more powerful because they open up more possibilities. But what is actually making them more powerful? What are some of the things that when you hear question number 3 and 4, what's happening inside you that's making them more powerful?
It's making me think.
Making you think, okay. Some answers in the chat, or that they have you think more about the answer and it triggers thinking. Yeah, so that's the purpose of questions. They should cause you to think, not just give an answer that you already know. So when we're talking about coaching, there are different kinds of questions. So when you're coaching, you're not asking questions that are simply data transfer or closed questions like, what time is it? 3 o'clock. Did you take a shower? Yes or no? Tell me about what you did yesterday. Did you speak to so-and-so? Those are all closed questions, and they're questions that I don't have to think about if I'm the receiver. I just transfer information onto you. So the kind of questions we want to ask are open and they're forward facing, which means I more than likely haven't sat and thought of that answer already, or I haven't experienced something that I'm just transferring data or information to you. What possibilities exist that we haven't thought of? That forces me to think before I can answer, more than a yes no question or a question with, here's your 2 options, give me one of these answers. So some of the qualities, like you all said, was that questions that are effective or powerful generate curiosity, they cause you to think. They can even cause you to recognize that there are assumptions that you're making that are keeping your focus closed in. So as you start to recognize these assumptions, many of them are false, your thinking can expand. They generate energy, they get you motivated, and because you're discovering new things, your brain actually moves forward, and you're discovering and learning and developing and moving to a new place and a new mindset. And by the way, those of you who are doing Agile coaching and you talk about the mindset of the people in the organizations and how we need to change to an Agile mindset, the way to help people change to an Agile mindset is not to tell them how to do it. It's to ask them questions that help them discover a new mindset that's going to bring them to the place where they're going to have an Agile mindset and be able to be more effective. So these questions evoke more questions. They stay with you. They help you to dig deeper rather than just transfer information. So again, I want to ask you, here's 2 questions. Which one do you find is more powerful if you're receiving this question? Is it, is it, when have you been most satisfied with our working relationship? Or are you satisfied with our working relationship? And of course, because I hit the little arrow, for me, I'm telling you that number 1 is more powerful. And it's because it's an open question. It has a wider scope than a yes or no answer. Here's another one. Why does our relationship have ups and downs? And how is our relationship satisfying? Now, we might have different answers on this one. Some people might find number 1 more powerful, and some people might find number 2 more powerful. So what are some of the answers that you have? We've got a couple of 1s, a couple of 2s. So I'd like to hear, well, why why do you think number one is more powerful if number one's your answer? And maybe you can unmute and give us a reason.
Hi, this is Angie. I
Mm-hmm.
think number one is more powerful because it helps us improve our relationship. It digs deeper into where we're doing well and where we're not doing well, and allows us to have the opportunity to make some adjustments to our relationship for the future.
Okay, good. And then I have somebody on the chat saying that number one is more leading and therefore more restrictive. So the scope of it is reduced to this: why does our relationship have ups and downs? So what about number two? Somebody else, if number two feels most powerful to you, what's one of your reasons?
I think it sparks you to give an example of what's going well in your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The picture, examples always paint a picture.
Mm-hmm. So you have to dig into your memory a bit and say, okay, and start to think about, well, what is satisfying and what do I find satisfying? I haven't really thought of it. And the same thing happens with number one. Um, I now have to think about my relationship and think about these ups and downs, and then say, well, I wonder what's provoking those. So generally, a why question can be more powerful than any of the other open questions. However, why questions come with a contingency. Why is very powerful, but it can also be very disruptive. So if you don't have a good relationship and you haven't built trust and rapport with someone, and you ask them a why question, it could really make them defensive. And instead of opening them up to discovery, it shuts them down. So it's really important that if you're going to use why questions, you make sure that you're using them in a relationship that can handle why questions. And, everything's trial and error. So if you use a why question and the person kind of starts to shut down and be like, well, what do you mean? Why are you asking me that? Then just change it and ask a different open question, rephrase it in a different way. So we want to be really considerate when using why. So this, I guess, display here is an example of opening entry points to questions that create open-ended questions. So on the bottom, the lowest level here are yes/no questions, or here's an option, pick an option questions. Those tend to be less powerful because they're closed. But as you move up the scale of the triangle, the questions become more and more powerful. So who can help you? When will you take the next step? Where can we find the answers? Those are way more powerful than do you need help? And then as you move up to what do you need to be successful? How will you become more successful? Or why do you want to be successful? They get more powerful, but don't get wrapped into a thought that, well, I always need to ask why because it's the most powerful question. You want to mix your questions all between these who, what, when, where, why, and how questions, because we need to fully understand the problem. We need to fully brainstorm the ideas and fully understand the solution before we can actually make one. And these are the type of questions that help you get there. And there will be times when a yes/no question is appropriate. But most of the time in any conversation, whether you're coaching or not coaching, open-ended questions are more effective and they help people feel more heard. So they create more trust. So I'm going to give a minute here for some feedback. So if you've got some thoughts or questions, I'd love to hear them, and let's get some conversation started. This is where silence comes in.
I'll start it.
Okay.
So when you haven't actually established a good relationship with a client or a team, and a why question would be more powerful, can you share some examples of maybe some different ways that we could ask a why question?
Mm-hmm. So maybe to be more disarming. So I'm noticing that you're doing this. Can you help me understand why this decision was made? But again, that can come off wrong, right? You can already hear it sounds like an accusation or a judgment. Maybe you say, "I'm curious. Why do you want to be successful?" Or you could just change it to what makes you want to be successful. If the question is, why do you want to be successful? You can very easily change a why question to a what question, and it becomes harmless. So, let's do an example of why did you come in to work late today? Now, that could feel very abrupt when it's really just curious. But if I change that to what made you get here late today, that's less, it may feel less judgmental. So it's a little bit easier to answer. So it can be really easy to switch those to what questions. Other thoughts?
Side up.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay, well,
Um, I have one question. I'm looking at how. Hi, this is Anshu. Sorry, I'm looking at how, and I'm wondering if how can we ask the how question, because sometimes, like you said, coaches are being looked upon as people who tell you how. So the how actually becomes a very questionable question. So how do we ask that?
Mm-hmm. And maybe you look at it more as an empowerment. So, how would you like to move forward? How would you prefer to see things happen in the future? And
Hmm.
so, I do want to. I want to help people to understand that while there is a thought that coaches are the subject matter expert, and as coaches, we do have to have subject matter expertise. We're actually more than consultants. So if my role is to tell you what to do and to share my knowledge with you and to give you expert opinions, then really what that makes me is a consultant. If my role is to give you training and to just teach you what to do so that you can go do it, then that makes me a teacher. If my role is to facilitate ceremonies, then I'm a facilitator. Maybe I am a mentor and I help you get better at what you already know. But I can be a coach and I can ask you questions trusting that you can figure out the answers. Instead of being more knowledgeable than you, I'm going to set that knowledge to the side and I'm going to be a thought partner so we can discover together what you can come up with so you can be empowered with your own solution. Now, with an Agile coach, there is occasion to do all of those. So a professional coach would stay in the coaching space. A Agile coach will move from coaching to consulting to mentoring to training to facilitating. And we need to understand where coaching is better for our client. So if we stay in that consultant mode, then our client will never grow and they'll become dependent on us because they can't make decisions without us telling them what to do. So we want to teach when they don't know. And when they do have expertise, we want to provoke their thought process and increase their knowledge and processing ability by asking them questions to help them figure out, what would I do if you weren't here? And that way they're not dependent on the coach.
Hey, Sherry.
Mm-hmm.
This is Padmini. Good time to ask a question.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you just mentioned is, the fundamental distinction between the professional coaching and agile coaching.
Mm-hmm.
But in certain situations, everything that you just mentioned with consulting, mentoring, and ensuring that you are in the space that your clients need, those are needed in some situations, right? We can't be in a neutral coaching position all the time, especially when you're engaged with the programs and you're becoming part of, offering solutions at some point, right? Depending on the expertise and the context and the backdrop of the problem. Would you, or, do you have the spaces where the agile coaches can step in? So, are there situations that in your experience it helped to leave the professional coaching space and then step into the consultant role or a mentoring role?
Oh, absolutely. All the time. And what I think the way I would phrase this is stay in the coaching mindset and approach things from a coaching stance. So even when you're consulting, because I do a lot of consulting, but when I'm consulting, I don't just jump in and give solutions and tell people what to do. I ask questions to really truly understand the problem, and then I give options. So here are some things that I've seen people do. Here are some things that I've seen successful. Here are some things you could try. Let's brainstorm some of that and see what you might come up with. And then there's other times when I say, okay, well, I'm going to make a professional recommendation here. This is what I really believe you should do. But you have the power to make that decision. So let's discuss it and see if you think it's the right decision for you.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome. For me, that's what an agile coach does. They stay in that coaching mindset. They stay in the coaching stance, and then they use their talent to the full breadth, whether it's consulting or training or mentoring. When I'm training, I'm doing it from a coaching perspective. So I'm asking questions and drawing the learning out of people rather than just lecturing.
I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Go
Hi.
ahead.
Hi, Sherry. So I was going to say that the what question, I kind of like when you're trying to distance the person from the situation. So you're trying to say that the issue is outside the person. So I find the why kind of makes it about the person. Why are you like this? Why did you do this? Why? It's more about you, the person who the question is directed to. But the what most times helps the person disengage themselves from whatever the issue it is that is causing them to. So I thought I shared that. The what question helps when you're trying to not cast blame on people, but help them think of what might be causing that issue that they're discussing.
Yeah, I really like that. So why feels more like I'm pointing at you, and what feels like I'm kind of pointing around. What? Where is it? There's something here, but it's not necessarily you. That's the issue. I like that. Thank you. So here's 3 different scenarios, and I'd like y'all to just take a quick read and maybe pick one and tell me what question, open-ended question, could you ask a team or a team member that you're working with that is in this space? So maybe you have a team that has decided on a solution, but they're still not moving forward. So maybe they have been in a retrospective, they said, this is what we're going to solve, but they're not doing anything. They're actually not improving. Or you have a team member who just keeps rehashing and rehashing what happened in the past, the problem they had, but for no apparent reason, or a team member that's really unsure. They're not sure what step to take. So, as a coach, what are some questions you might ask? And just indicate what scenario you're talking to as you give your question.
I will go
Okay.
question one. The team has decided on a solution but isn't moving forward. I think a question I'll ask is, what is blocking us or what is stopping us from moving forward?
Yeah, I like that. Open-ended question, and it causes them to think outside the box, not to just rehearse details. Okay?
Hi, this is Rishi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think for 1 and 3, I think for the most part, I'd probably work on each by asking what are the bodies of work that you need to do to make this a success. I think blockers will also come part of that. So I think that's where I would start.
Yeah. So what is it that you have to work on? Yep.
Yeah.
So it's helping them to mentally break down what they're doing and what they need. Good. What, who else has a question you would ask? Here's one on chat. Number 1, what do you think is happening that's preventing us from moving forward? Yeah, that's another really great question. Open-ended, and it causes them to think beyond where they are today.
For number 2, I would probably ask, like, if the team member is rehashing something that happened in past again and again, I would like to ask, like, what are his concerns around that, and does he have, or does he, she, whatever, has any alternative to what problems or whatever happened in past, and how could we make more improvements, keeping in mind what happened in past.
hmm So, and that those are really good. And I think for the second one, do you have alternates? You would just make sure you start with an open entry. So, what are some alternates that you have, or who can help you find alternate solutions? So that way you don't have a yes no, but you're asking them to act. Because if you ask, do you have other solutions, they could say no. But if you ask them what other solutions are available, now you're asking them to think about a solution and actually come up with one. Great. I think y'all are getting this.
For number 2, a team member is rehashing a story of something that happened in the past. I think I'll ask, why is this important to you? If they're repeating the same thing, maybe there's something there that is so important to them.
Yeah. Why is this important? Why is this relevant today? How does this connect to your current scenario? How is this helping? There's so many questions. So there's not like a list of here's all the powerful questions in the world. What makes a question powerful is that it's well formed. And the person who receives the question is really the one who decides if it's powerful. And some questions will be powerful for me today in this scenario, and tomorrow they won't be powerful for me because they just don't connect at that moment, and that's okay. Don't worry about asking the right question that's going to be the powerful question. Just worry about asking well-formed, open-ended questions that are brief, and that will be enough to push people to new learning. So a couple of other points here is that a lot of the questions we pose actually have assumptions that are built into them. So what did we do wrong and who is responsible? Well, those have assumptions that, number one, something was wrong. Now, maybe it's obvious that something's wrong, but it has this who's responsible, like it's somebody's fault. So while that is an open-ended question, I don't know that is forward thinking. It is rear thinking. It's more data transfer. Tell me what we did wrong and tell me who did it. Well, my question is, how is that helping? So how do we move forward? Maybe a better question is, what can we do differently next time so we don't repeat this problem? Now we're thinking forward, not just transferring data and pointing to answers. What can we learn from what's happened? What possibilities do we see now? That's a more open-ended And there's also an assumption here. There's an assumption that even though something happened, we can learn from it. There's new possibilities that exist. So just because there's an assumption doesn't mean it's bad. But recognize where your assumptions are as you're asking your client questions, because if you have assumptions that you don't fully have control over, then you may ask leading questions. So we don't want to ask questions that are leading people to the answer you've already determined. We want to ask truly curious, open questions that help people to move forward. And then some of the answers we hear have assumptions built in. I'm not a people person. Well, that kind of has the assumption that you don't like people and you don't want to be around people. Well, maybe the problem, if this person really has, is I find large crowds energy draining. So I like to be with one or two people, but I just don't get energy from being with a whole crowd of people. So sometimes you may hear people give answers that are something like, oh, the managers will never let us do that. Well, there's an assumption there that the managers will never let you do that. Is that a valid answer? Well, maybe, but how do you know they won't let you do that? So we want to unbury that assumption, especially if it's limiting. So it may be a limiting belief that managers won't let us do anything. And if we can break that belief and open up the space a little bit, so, well, what if they would let you? What would you do? Then we can create some new thinking. Okay? So the last part here, when you're asking questions, is that you want to ask curious questions. Now, when I say curious, I'm curious for me as the coach, but I'm even more curious for the client. I want to ask questions that create curiosity in the client to go in their mind and explore the answer and find it. So as a coach, the questions I'm asking aren't about me and my needs. They're about the client and what the client needs. So not providing solutions if we're coaching. Instead, we want to ask questions to help the client understand their situation and understand the options so that they can select a solution. We're not manipulating them into the answer that we want them to make. If you have a suggestion, just make the suggestion. Don't manipulate them into guessing what your suggestion is and thinking it was their idea. That's manipulation. We don't want to do that because it doesn't create trust. And then we want to explore those limiting beliefs. When you hear something that's like, that sounds like there's an assumption or a belief there that could be holding you back, let's dig into that a little bit and explore it and see if we can't move beyond it. So I want to open up again and give opportunity for you to give some comments or questions about some of this material that we've covered.